de conciencia.
We ask forgiveness for the abuses in Ireland, abuses of power, conscience, and sexual abuse perpetrated by members with roles of responsibility in the Church.
Pope Francis in Ireland apologising for a decades-long sex abuse scandal, while a former top Vatican diplomat calls on the pontiff to resign. Hello, I'm Nathan King, sitting in for Anna Naidu, and this is The Heat. Hello again. Pope Francis spent the weekend in Ireland, the first visit by a pope there in nearly 40 years. His mission to reconnect with the country's 3.7 million Catholics and seek forgiveness for members of the Church's leadership who, quote, kept quiet about clerical child sex abuse. But on Sunday, the Church was rocked by a new allegation. Carlo Maria Viganò, the former top Vatican diplomat here in the United States and a staunch critic of the Pope, claimed in a letter that Pope Francis himself joined top Vatican officials in covering up the abuses. He called on the Pope to resign. CGTN's Jim Spellman has more on a scandal that's gone on for more than 30 years.
Pope Francis making his first trip to Ireland as leader of the Catholic Church, posing for selfies before cheering crowds, and facing some protesters as the Catholic Church is once again embroiled in a child sex abuse scandal.
It is my hope that the gravity of the abuse scandals, which have cast a light on the failings of many, will serve to emphasize the importance of the protection of minors and vulnerable adults on the part of society as a whole.
In the U.S. state of Pennsylvania, a grand jury examined internal church documents and found that more than 300 predator priests sexually abused at least 1,000 child victims since 1947.
All of the victims were brushed aside in every part of the state by church leaders who preferred to protect the abusers and their institutions above all. Priests were raping little boys and girls, and the men of God who were responsible for them not only did nothing, they hid it all for decades.
The report says the crimes were systematically covered up by the Catholic Church, for many victims an unforgivable breach of trust.
I have forgiven my abuser years ago, and I have gotten over the physical side of the abuse. What is impossible to get over is the systemic cover-up.
The investigation found priests were shuttled from parish to parish to shield them from consequences.
To those of you who have in any way been the victim of any abuse, sexual or otherwise, whether as a child or as an adult, I ask you, the Church asks you for forgiveness.
Sex abuse within the Catholic Church is a global problem. A 2017 report from Australia identified more than 4,000 victims of sexual abuse by adults in the Catholic Church dating back to 1980. This past May, all 34 bishops in Chile offered their resignations after prosecutors identified dozens of underage victims of sexual assault by clergy and lay people in the Church. The Vatican has struggled to respond to the cases. The Pope apologized to the victims in Chile and released a letter addressing the report from Pennsylvania, reading in part, "Looking ahead to the future, no effort must be spared to create a culture able to prevent such situations from happening, but also to prevent the possibility of their being covered up and perpetuated." In Ireland, Pope Francis met with 8 victims there and addressed the wider crisis.
We ask forgiveness for all those times in which the Church has not demonstrated compassion towards the survivors of all types of abuse and towards those looking for justice in truth and concrete action. We ask for forgiveness.
But the Vatican has yet to put forward a comprehensive strategy for dealing with sex abuse cases.
He's going to leave, but the problem's going to remain.
Peter Isley is an American survivor of sex abuse by a priest. He traveled to Ireland for the Pope's visit.
What the Pope, again, didn't tell us or anybody is how he is going to end this crisis.
Many of the victims want the Vatican to open all church records pertaining to child sex abuse, so the abusers can be brought to justice and the victims can find some peace, something they say is long overdue. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.